Good morning, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. Has everybody seen Cyril's shoes, by the way? You have to get a picture of Cyril Rogers' shoes at some point. His budget day shoes. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. Welcome. Bienvenue. When I travel around our wonderful city, I'm so fortunate to meet many of the terrific residents of Ottawa. What I've been hearing from a lot of people is that they're anxious right now. Ils s'inquiètent de l'augmentation des coûts. They're worried about rising costs. They're nervous about the economy and global political uncertainty. They're concerned that some things just don't work as well as they used to. Rising costs are hurting everyone. I spoke recently with a couple who were really hoping that interest rates would drop so they could purchase their first home. They were also worried about whether they'd be able to afford hockey for their kids. I've chatted with federal public servants who worry about the prospect of layoffs in the future. I was speaking with a business owner on the weekend who said he's worried his numbers will be down a little bit this year because his customers are tightening their budgets. In a time like this, Ottawa residents expect their elected leaders to do what they're doing. Like families across our city, we have to manage our resources very, very carefully right now. We have to make tough decisions. We have to keep our costs under control. We have to save money wherever we can. Nous devons maîtriser nos coûts et faire des économies partout où nous le pouvons. We also have to invest in our greatest priorities. We have to support and sustain critical services to protect safety, reliability, and affordability. Our residents expect us to invest in what matters, and they also expect that we fight on their behalf to keep things affordable. We have to strike a balance. Nous devons trouver un équilibre. I can tell you in the current circumstances, that's not easy. I said almost a year ago, after we passed the 2024 budget, that the 2025 budget would be a tough one, and it has been. We're facing significant financial challenges. Nous faisons face à des défis financiers importants. Like our residents, we're facing rising costs. Our transit system still hasn't recovered after the pandemic. Notre système de transport en commun ne s'est toujours pas remis de la pandémie. And as I've been speaking about regularly since the summer, we are not getting our fair share of funding from other levels of government. Nous ne recevons pas notre juste part de financement des autres niveaux de gouvernement. In the face of those challenges, we must strike the right balance. This budget is a balanced approach to our residents' needs. Ce budget propose une approche équilibrée répondant aux besoins de nos résidents. First of all, it invests significantly in the core priorities that matter most to our residents: public safety, public transit, roads and sidewalks, housing, and supporting the most vulnerable. Ensuite, Il maintient les augmentations de taxes aussi basses que possible. It keeps tax increases as low as possible to ensure we are not adding to the financial pressures that our residents are already facing. It continues to live up to our objective of building a safer, more reliable, more affordable city. Just before I get into a few highlights, I wanted to address the Fairness for Ottawa campaign. I know a lot of people will be wondering, where do we stand on the campaign? What impact will that have on our budget? First of all, I want to thank residents for their support of the Fairness for Ottawa campaign. I've been encouraged by many people in our city to continue to advocate on behalf of Ottawa. I want to remind everyone what the Fairness for Ottawa campaign is about. It's about the long-term structural deficits that we are facing in our city's finances. Il s'agit de la crise financière systémique. It's about the systemic financial crisis being faced by municipalities across Canada, but particularly by Ottawa because of our unique circumstances. So even if we get some help with next year's budget, that doesn't mean we've reached the finish line. The Fairness for Ottawa campaign is going to continue until the systemic structural issues are resolved. La campagne pour l'équité va continuer tant que les problèmes systémiques et structurels ne seront pas résolus. So obviously, I'm not standing here today with checks from the other two levels of government. I can tell you, however, that we are making progress. I hope there will be more news in the coming weeks. And that progress informs our decisions about transit, which I'll get into in a few minutes. The help that we need from other levels of government remains absolutely critical to respond to our systemic financial pressures. There will be a detailed presentation on the 2025 budget this morning at City Council, but I'm going to go through some of the highlights now as we invest in what matters most and fight for affordability. First, we're investing in public safety. There is nothing more important than emergency services being available when our residents need them. Il n'y a rien de plus important que d'avoir des services d'urgence disponibles lorsque nous en avons besoin. I'm grateful to every member of our police, fire, and paramedic departments, and I want to support their work as much as possible. To increase service and improve response times, this budget provides the funding to hire 50 new police officers to support the new district policing model. In addition, we will hire 23 new paramedics to increase service and reduce the impact of offload delays. We will also hire 22 new firefighters and 10 new bylaw officers to respond to growth in the community. That's more than 100 new emergency responders in our city. Cela représente plus de 100 nouveaux intervenants d'urgence dans notre ville. I hear often about the state of our roads and sidewalks from residents throughout Ottawa. I also hear concerns about safety for pedestrians, cyclists, and motorists. We have a big city with a lot of transportation infrastructure. Nous investissons donc un total de 104 millions de dollars, so we're investing a total of $104 million to improve our roads and sidewalks and to improve safety. This includes $89.6 million to repair and resurface roads, $14.2 million in new sidewalks and maintaining existing sidewalks, and $13.7 million to improve the clearing of sidewalks and pathways in the winter season. We will also be investing in upgrading major arteries, including Brian Coburn Boulevard in the east and Carp Road in the west. I've heard from several members of council about the backlog of intersections that should have traffic signals. We're adding $20.5 million over the next 2 years to reduce that backlog by at least 1/3. Now, let's talk about OC Transpo. Public transit is one of our greatest challenges and one of our most important services. In 2025, we will be making a historic investment in public transit and expanding service dramatically. Le budget d'OC Transpo s'élèvera à 856 millions de dollars en 2025. OC Transpo's budget is rising to $856 million in 2025. That's $88 million more than 2024, an increase of more than 11%. We're opening 2 new sections of light rail in the next 12 months. We're investing in more reliable service. We're putting more money into paratranspo. The budget includes funding for transit priority measures on Innes Road between Blair Road and Navan Road, supporting the traffic flow and transit reliability for the eastern communities. I'll talk more in a moment about how we're going to make these investments despite the funding shortfalls that we're experiencing. In Ottawa, we will always look after and support the most vulnerable. We are a community that cares. Nous sommes une communauté qui se soucie des autres. This budget allocates more than $30 million to 100 plus nonprofit social service agencies to address the root causes of poverty. Nous continuons également à investir dans le logement abordable. We will also continue to invest in affordable housing to add to the historic investments we've already made with the help of the Federal Housing Accelerator Fund and the Provincial Building Faster Fund. We're responding to food insecurity with an increase in funding for organizations that purchase groceries to support vulnerable residents. We're also launching a pilot project to help disadvantaged people with their income tax returns, potentially unlocking millions of dollars from other levels of government that will go directly into the hands of vulnerable residents. We're continuing to invest in quality of life for our residents. We're going to put more money toward recreation, culture, and communities. Nous allons investir dans les loisirs, la culture, et les communautés. That includes an investment to advance the refurbishment of Alexander Community Center, which will move forward in 2026. It also includes more money to advance the Riverside South Community Center and Recreation Complex, and funds to advance the new Barhaven Town Center Civic Complex. And we're putting $10 million toward the William Street project as part of the Byward Market Public Realm Plan. As you know, we recently held Ottawa's first Rural Summit since 2008, where I worked closely with rural councillors and residents to discuss the unique needs and contributions of our rural communities. At the summit, we made a series of commitments to ensure we're providing rural solutions for rural residents. Lors du sommet, nous avons pris une série d'engagements pour nous assurer de fournir des solutions rurales pour les communautés rurales. In the budget, we're doubling the allocation for ditching and draining infrastructure to address long-standing concerns from rural residents. We're adding full-time firefighters to Station 81 in Stittsville to address growing service demands in rural areas. We're also investing in ensuring they meet the needs of growing rural communities. As part of the city's anti-racism strategy, budget for Black-led youth initiatives, there's more money to support Indigenous organizations in partnership with the Ottawa Aboriginal Coalition. These are just a few examples of the investments we're making, but obviously we are investing significantly in our priorities. I want to underline that despite these and many other historic investments in what matters most, we are going to continue to protect affordability for our residents by keeping the tax increase for 2025 as low as possible. There are people that have argued we should have much higher tax increases, such as 9 or 10%, like other cities in Ontario and across Canada. I simply don't agree with that. Keeping taxes low is one of the biggest commitments I made to residents in the 2022 election campaign, and we've delivered in every budget so far this term. On top of all the other pressures they are facing, our residents simply can't afford big tax increases. Large tax increases add significantly to inflation, and they don't just impact property owners, they impact everyone. Ils ont un impact sur tout le monde. They add to the burden of renters, small business owners, and the cost of every product and service. When taxes go up, rent goes up. Lorsque les taxes augmentent, le loyer augmente. Lorsque les taxes augmentent, les petites entreprises paient davantage et doivent faire payer davantage leurs clientes. When taxes go up, small businesses pay more, and they have to charge their customers more. When taxes go up, everybody pays more. For example, our research has found that a property tax increase of 1% above inflation actually leads to a rent increase of 9.3% over 10 years. And I'll remind everyone that this is a matter of fairness. We can't keep asking local taxpayers to continue to make up the difference for other levels of government that aren't paying their fair share. So we are maintaining our commitment to affordability with a 2.9% tax increase for most core city services. Nous maintenons notre engagement en faveur de l'abordabilité avec une augmentation de 2,9% des impôts pour les services de base de la ville. How are we doing that? It's not easy. Given the pressures we're facing, and that we're still fighting for our fair share from other levels of government, we have to work extremely hard to achieve that balance. While we wait for more sustainable funding solutions, we're going to have to do a lot of patchwork and use a lot of duct tape to get through each budget year. Ces solutions ne sont pas toujours idéales. These solutions aren't always ideal. Many of them are one-time answers that will help us only in 2025, but in the current climate, that's what we need to do. As a result, there's been a lot of difficult work and tough decisions throughout the organization. We've put in place a hiring pause and a discretionary spending freeze. In addition, the service review team has been working hard and spending a lot of hours meeting with many different departments to find savings and efficiencies. And I'm happy to report that an additional $54 million in savings has been found for the 2025 budget. Une économie supplémentaire de 54 millions de dollars a été trouvée pour le budget de 2025. Cela porte notre total à 208 millions de dollars depuis le début de ce mandat. That brings our total so far this term to $208 million. That's all money that's being reinvested in our priorities. I want to thank my colleagues Marty Carr and Kathy Curry and city staff for their work on the service review. In addition, we've had to make some tough decisions about how we fund transit. As you know, we started this process with a $120 million shortfall in our operating budget. Until we get sustainable operating funds from other levels of government, we'll have to make some difficult choices. I want to thank the members of the working group on the long-range financial plan for transit, Councillors Jeff Leeper, Glenn Gower, and Tim Tierney. Along with transit and finance staff, we spent more than 100 hours going over a wide range of options. I'll remind you that the budget direction report suggested that we look at a fare increase of between 2.5% and 75%, une augmentation des tarifs comprise entre 2,5 et 75%, a transit levy increase of between 2.9% and 37%, adjustments to fare discounts, operating efficiencies, service reductions, capital deferrals, and other revenue tools for the future. Protect and sustain our public transit system, and find not just immediate answers for the 2025 budget, but long-term solutions to respond to the huge multi-billion-dollar gap in our long-range financial plan. We tried to find a balance between providing sustainable long-term funding for transit while respecting the financial pressures faced by both taxpayers and OC Transpo customers. Obviously, nobody wants a 75% fare increase. Nobody wants a 37% increase in the transit levy. And nobody wants to see cuts to service. The recommendations of the working group are included in this budget. They are an 8% increase to the transit levy, representing an additional 1% increase in property taxes for those who pay the levy. Une augmentation de 8% de la taxe sur le transport en commun. A 5% fare increase, or about 19 cents on a typical adult ride. A deferral of capital expenditures of $21.3 million. Operating efficiencies of $12.4 million. An adjustment to discounts to bring them in line with those in other cities. A placeholder of $36 million for help from other levels of government. And no service reductions at this time. These are not easy decisions. We'd rather not increase either fares or the transit levy by higher than normal amounts. And we don't want to have to reduce the discounts that we provide. But most of all, we don't want to see reductions in service. Surtout, nous ne voulons pas voir de réduction de service. So in the absence of sustainable funding for transit from other levels of government, these steps are fundamentally necessary to address the long-term shortfalls in our transit budget and ensure we can continue to provide service at existing and future levels. This is a balanced approach. And it injects much needed funds into the transit budget in a way that impacts not just 2025, but every year after that. Combined, the additional fare and transit levy in the 2025 budget will add approximately $1.5 billion by 2048. Ensemble, l'augmentation des tarifs et de la taxe sur le transport en commun dans le budget ajoutera environ 1,5 milliard de dollars d'ici à 2048. I recognize that not everyone will agree with fare increases or changes to discounts, and not everyone will agree with the increase in the transit levy. There will be people arguing that OC Transpo customers should pay even more of the cost of service. There will be people arguing that we should freeze or cut fares, and the taxpayers should pay more. The working group strived for a balance, and again, to tackle this enormous challenge without reducing service. We look very closely at the discounts we've been providing, for example, to school boards for student passes. We've been providing these passes at a loss in the past, and we simply must move toward recovering our costs on these agreements. Nous devons absolument nous diriger vers la récupération de nos coûts sur ces accords. Otherwise, local taxpayers are subsidizing the cost for another level of government. When we're not getting our fair share of funding, we can't pay another government's share for the cost of transit passes for students. We will continue to have discounted fares for seniors and youth, but the discounts won't be as large as they were in the past. Now they will be more in line with what's offered in other cities. We were actually giving bigger discounts than many other places. And we will continue to provide the Equipass to support our most vulnerable, including seniors and youth. Nothing about that is changing. I want to emphasize again how much we are investing in transit. Since 2016, the transit budget has increased by 62%. Depuis 2016, le budget de transport en commun a augmenté de 62%. We continue to expand and improve transit. The transit budget is growing more rapidly than almost any other department. Some of the solutions in the budget are one-time patchwork initiatives to cover the gap just in 2025, which is why in the future we will need proper, sustainable funding to support transit. And I want to talk about one possible way that could be achieved. One example that has been advanced by organizations like the Federation of Canadian Municipalities is to take a portion of the HST and to provide it to cities. A high-level analysis shows that Ottawa residents pay more than $4.5 billion in HST every year to the provincial and federal governments. That's an average of close to $10,000 per household in HST. That's much more than the average property tax bill. And that's just the HST. That doesn't include the income taxes that you pay to the provincial and federal governments. So you can see how much more the typical household pays to other levels of government compared to local government. If we were to receive even a small portion of HST in the future, it would provide reliable, sustainable funding for transit and other priorities. Même une petite partie de la TVH à l'avenir fournirait un financement fiable pour les transports en commun et d'autres priorités. In the absence of that kind of sustainable funding, we have to make tough decisions. I want to be very clear. Every single investment in this budget is strategic, necessary, and focused on delivering essential services that directly impact and benefit the people of Ottawa. Chaque investissement dans ce budget est stratégique, nécessaire et axé sur la fourniture de services essentiels qui ont un impact direct et qui profitent aux résidents d'Ottawa. As part of that strategic approach, we are managing our workforce very carefully. Our city has been growing rapidly, and so have the demands on city service. But our workforce has not been growing at the same rate. While the city has grown by over 17%, the workforce has grown by only 12%. Some of that growth within existing resources. And where we have hired new people, it's been to deliver frontline services and not in administration. This isn't by accident. It's the result of a deliberate approach towards efficiency and fiscal responsibility. we're working to keep the team as lean as possible. Our goal is to keep Ottawa running effectively without unnecessary costs. Notre objectif est de maintenir Ottawa en fonctionnement de manière efficace, sans coût inutile. There's no such thing as a perfect budget. There's no budget that will make everyone happy, but this budget strikes an important balance. It respects the expectations of our residents to invest in the most important priorities, while also respecting their need that we do not add significant financial pressures to their lives. This budget is a balanced, responsible approach to the challenges we're facing right now. It invests in what matters most, in key priorities like public transit, public safety, housing, roads and infrastructure, and helping the most vulnerable. Il investit dans ce qui compte le plus, dans des priorités clés, telles que le transport en commun, la sécurité publique, le logement, les routes et les infrastructures, ainsi que l'aide aux personnes les plus vulnérables. I understand and respect the challenges, the many challenges that our residents are facing. That's why we must fight for affordability and keep tax increases as low as possible so we're not adding to inflationary pressures on everyone. As I mentioned, we've now found more than $200 million in savings. That's the equivalent of a 10.5% tax increase. We're taking those savings and reinvesting them in what matters most. And yes, we're counting on the federal and provincial governments to do the right thing and support us. As I did last year, I will point out that the task will not get easier with the next budget. Even before tabling the 2025 budget, we've begun work on the 2026 budget. This has been a difficult budget process. There have been a lot of tough decisions. Il y a eu beaucoup de décisions difficiles. But this budget meets our objectives of respecting taxpayers during an affordability crisis and funding our priorities. This budget is about meeting the needs of our residents. It's about balance, it's about fairness, it's about investing in priorities, it's about managing our resources wisely. Ce budget vise à répondre aux besoins de nos résidents. Il s'agit d'un équilibre, il s'agit de justice, il s'agit d'investir dans les priorités, il s'agit de gérer nos ressources de manière prudente. I want to assure the people of Ottawa that as long as I'm your mayor, I will continue to fight for affordability and invest in what matters most. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
All right, we'll now go for questions with the media. You may have one question and one follow-up. Nous allons maintenant répondre aux questions des médias. Vous pouvez poser une question et une question suivie. We'll now start with, nous allons commencer par Blair Crawford, Ottawa Citizen.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor. You said when you were talking about potential tax increases that you simply don't agree with bringing Ottawa online with other cities. And yet Jenna Sudds, Minister Sudds, earlier this year said Ottawa had to get for more money from the federal government. I'm just wondering how you square that when the federal government seems to be telling you to do more.
Nobody in the federal government has asked me to increase taxes by a certain amount. I've never heard that message from anyone in the federal government. Our fiscal house is in order. We have a responsible budget. We have a solid fiscal foundation. And I'm not going to add to the burden of local taxpayers are not giving us our fair share of resources. We're already paying more than we should for some of the services we're delivering when you compare Ottawa to other cities. So the solution is not big tax increases. The solution is other levels of government giving us our fair share.
And you talked about a placeholder in the budget for money coming. Is that $36 million, I think?
$36 million, yeah.
So it's been several months since you've been negotiating. The Premier was in town last week and there was no new money coming. I'm just wondering where you came up with that figure and what makes you optimistic that you'll see that money.
I'm encouraged by the conversations I've been having with both levels of government, and based on that, I never count on anything until it happens, until it's a done deal, but based on those conversations, I think it's an achievable target to receive $36 million or more from the other levels of government towards the 2025 budget. So I hope there will be more news in the coming weeks, and based on recent conversations, I'm feeling more optimistic.
Thank you. Well,
Oui, seulement la dernière réponse, oui. Alors, j'ai parlé souvent avec les autres niveaux de gouvernement et je suis optimistique qu'il y aura des annonces dans les semaines suivantes. C'est toujours difficile, c'est toujours une négociation, mais j'espère qu'il y aura des solutions à l'avenir proche.
okay, we'll go to Elise Segura, CBC.
Yeah, my first question is, hello, and good to see you on Budget Day. My first question is related to the placeholder as well. I'm just wondering if that money doesn't come through, how do you fill the placeholder, 36 million?
That's something we'll have to tackle in 2025, but right now my focus is on getting the provincial and federal governments to do the right thing, to support us, to give us our fair share. So we've created an opportunity for them to do that. They're aware that that's what we're looking for. And so I'm going to work very hard and negotiate very hard with the other levels of government to get some results in that area.
So no immediate backup plan?
Well, you know, there's always different things we can do during the course of a year, but nothing appealing, you know, nothing that is going to be appealing to residents. So our first and greatest priority is to get the help that we need and deserve from other levels of government.
And the second question that I have is regarding the money from the federal and provincial governments. So the placeholder is 36 million. Before we were talking about 120 million. If you were to get more money from the federal and provincial governments, just a what if, does it change any of the increases that you've discussed on transit?
We'll have to see how much we receive from other levels of government, but I think we have to remember that this is not just a 2025 budget issue. So we have a $140 million hole in the 2026 transit budget. So if there are additional funds beyond what we need for the 2025 budget, depending on what form those funds take, we may need to apply some of those funds to the 2026 budget and beyond, because these are structural deficits that we have in our transit budget.
But regardless, then what I'm hearing is that the increases stay, the fare increase.
Yeah, I mean,
the transit levy
you know,
increase.
we'll see where we get in the coming weeks. We'll see how much money we receive, and we can make decisions accordingly. But I think, you know, these are steps that we need to take. And as I pointed out, increasing the transit levy and increasing transit fares are necessary not just for 2025, but to build the base of transit funding for many years to come. We can't continue to keep, you know, we can't continue to have a $8 or $9 billion hole in the long-range forecast for transit.
And if you could just take those two answers and make them into one French answer for my colleague. Thank you so much.
What was the first one about again?
Yes, in terms of what happens if you don't
Right.
get the money, and in terms of what you need for the coming years, I suppose.
Oui.
Thank you.
Alors, nous avons des défis structurels dans le budget pour le transport en commun. Alors, c'est très difficile. Alors, s'il y a plus d'argent des autres niveaux de gouvernement, je pense que c'est prudent d'avancer ces fonds pour le budget de 2026 et après pour les années suivantes.
Thank you. We'll now go to Kate Porter, CBC.
Hello, Mayor.
Good morning.
Good morning. So fare increases will be double what they were last year, and you're adding to the tax bill, and yet so many people in this city are just fed up with OC Transpo. I waited 20 minutes. It didn't come today. I went home and got the car. What do you say to all these people who are saying, we're going to be paying more, and I don't even want to take the system anymore?
I understand the concerns of residents about the quality of service. The quality of service has actually been improving if you look at the numbers over the last few months, but it's always got to get better. But the solution to having better service is not to cut the sources of funding for transit. If we have less and less money for transit going forward, we're going to have less and less service. So the only way forward is to invest in OC Transpo. We are investing at a historic level in OC Transpo. We're increasing the budget by $88 million. That's an 11% increase over 2024. So we're investing in public transit. We're expanding the service. We're improving the service. And that's the only way that we can offer better service to our residents, is to put more money into it.
My second question is just This strikes me as a break with tradition that you're having these remarks ahead of having the chief financial officer presented in council. And you've done 3 such announcements in this budget process. And I know that you have new powers, and this is your budget, but why take this approach where you're presenting things like this ahead of time in more of a, where you're presenting all of your ideas ahead of being in council chambers?
First of all, I couldn't wait to tell all of you about what's in the budget. I was just that excited. But I think what residents really care about is what's in the budget, not exactly what time my remarks are delivered. This is an opportunity for me to share some details and answer your questions right away. The format at council meetings where I give some remarks and then we go through an entire council meeting and members of the media don't get to talk to me until after the entire council meeting is over. And then in some cases that might be past deadline. If today's council meeting has a lot on the agenda, I might not be speaking to reporters after the meeting until 4 or 5 o'clock. That's past deadline for many of you. So I thought it would be good for you to have an opportunity to speak to me directly about the budget, be able to do your work during the meeting and get the message out to the community as early as possible.
Okay. Thanks for respecting our deadlines.
It was all for you,
Okay.
Kate. Yeah.
Thank you. We'll go to Bruce Deitrin, the Ottawa Citizen.
Good morning, Bruce.
Your mayor. Can you tell me if this budget goes into the reserve funds at all?
I guess the short answer would be no. No, it doesn't.
Is there a longer answer that says yes?
Well, as you know, you and I had a discussion 2 years ago about how there are some reserves that have been set aside for specific purposes, and those reserves are released at different times to fund the priorities that we were saving money for. So I don't know what happens with those. But those are not our tax stabilization reserves or anything like that. We're not using reserves in this budget to achieve a balanced budget.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you. We'll go to Katie Griffin, CTV.
Hi, Katie. Okay.
You've mentioned that you have to make tough decisions for this budget, for the next budget. Why not make those tough decisions now, either through attrition or program cuts, so that you have the money, as opposed to just hoping that you're going to get it at some point?
We've made tough decisions about how we spend money at the city. We found $208 million in savings and efficiencies since the start of this term of council. That's less than 2 years ago. So in a couple of years, working with the councillors on the service review team, working with city staff, we found $208 million in savings. That's the equivalent of a 10.5% tax increase that we're not giving to our residents, and instead we're reinvesting in our priorities. So we've done the hard work to find savings, and we're going to keep doing that.
Nous allons maintenant à Mama Fou, Radio-Canada.
Ok,
Bonjour.
c'est mon
Oui.
tour. Bonjour.
Oui.
J'étais à la conférence de presse en bas de plusieurs organismes communautaires de la ville d'Ottawa. Eux, ils appellent en fait à mettre les priorités budgétaires dans, par exemple, le transport en commun, les services communautaires. Qu'est-ce que vous leur répondez? Eux, ils critiquent un petit peu, par exemple, l'argent qui est mis par la ville d'Ottawa dans Lansdowne, dans d'autres projets, dans l'élargissement de certaines routes. Ils disent qu'on devrait mettre cet argent ailleurs et on devrait augmenter les taxes foncières comme Toronto. Qu'est-ce que vous leur répondez?
Alors, comme j'ai dit, c'est un budget équilibré. Alors, nous avons beaucoup de priorités, mais c'est très important de respecter la crise d'abordabilité pour nos résidents. Alors, c'est nécessaire de maintenir les augmentations de taxes très basses, le plus basses que possible. Aussi, nous investissons dans nos priorités, comme le transport en commun. C'est un budget historique pour le transport en commun, une augmentation de 11% pour le transport en commun, une augmentation de $88 pour les nouveaux services. Alors, nous investissons dans les services communautaires, dans le transport en commun, dans la sécurité publique, dans les logements, dans toutes nos priorités. Et nous sommes capables de faire ça parce que nous avons trouvé beaucoup des économies, beaucoup des efficaces, et nous investissons ces économies dans nos priorités.
Ma question de suivi, ça va être, vos annonces de ce matin, ça va représenter à peu près 3,9% pour les taxes foncières des résidents d'Ottawa. On sait que les temps sont difficiles, les budgets sont de plus en plus... Beaucoup de familles d'Ottawa n'arrivent pas à bien manger, n'arrivent pas à boucler leur fin de mois. C'est quoi le message que vous leur envoyez en augmentant ces taxes-là?
Alors, nous avons pris une approche équilibrée d'investir dans nos priorités, mais aussi de maintenir des augmentations le plus bas que possible. Alors, je sais que les familles partout à Ottawa font face à des défis financiers, mais nous devrons investir et ces augmentations des impôts sont plus bas que la plupart des villes partout au Canada. Alors, c'est important de maintenir les augmentations le plus bas que possible et d'investir dans nos priorités. Et je pense que ça, c'est ce que nous avons fait.
Merci.
Merci à vous.
Merci beaucoup. This concludes today's media availability. Ceci conclut le point de presse d'aujourd'hui. Thank you. Merci.
Merci.